And I don't want to lose you with all this theory. Please, I really don't. I understand it can be a bit abstract, and I mean the execution context in and of itself is an abstract concept. It's an environment where JavaScript code is evaluated and executed. But if there's one thing you're going to take away from this, just remember, whenever any code runs in JavaScript, it has to be run inside an execution context. And there are different types of execution contexts. I'm going to talk about two here, but there are actually three. The third one is called an eval function execution context. And this is just code that's executed inside an eval function. And that gets its own execution context. But eval isn't used by us JavaScript developers, so I'm just not going to discuss it here. It's a bit pointless. The ones that are important to us are 1. The global execution context, and 2. The functional execution context. Well, let's start somewhere. Let's start with the global execution context. The first point to note with this is that this is the default or base execution context. When you go and create a JavaScript file and you just open it up, boom, that's the global execution context created. Cool, right? And it makes sense. And what else is in the global execution context when you start writing JavaScript? Any code not within a function is global. And what does this global execution context do? It does one of two things. 1, it creates a global object. Remember how we've always been accessing the window object? We've seen that many times throughout this course. Well, that is the global object, and that's created by the global execution context. And what's the second thing it does? It sets this to the global object. And we're going to see examples of this shortly. But the main point that you need to know with the global execution context is that there can be how many in each program? That's right. There can only be one global execution context in any given program. That's an important point to remember. Okay, enough with global execution contexts. You've got that nailed. Now let's move on to the second type of execution context, and that is functional execution context. Remember how we just said that there can only be one global execution context? Well, a functional execution context is different, because when a function is called, and remember, what's the programming jargon for that? It's just invoked. When a function is invoked, a new execution context, in particular a new functional execution context, is created for that function. So this means that each function has its own unique execution context. And I just want to stress this again, there can be lots of functional execution contexts running at the same time. Yo, we have done a lot, but this is only theory. Let me show you an example of what this means.